A man in a cell at Alcatraz could stand in the middle of the floor, put both arms out, and touch the walls on either side. 5 feet by 9, he ate better than any other federal prisoner in America. More than 3,000 calories a day, seconds allowed, pie and ice cream on the tray. He was not permitted to speak. This was the United States Penitentiary at Alcatraz in San Francisco Bay in 1935. The men who got off the island that year talked. One was paroled in the spring and told reporters the place was driving men insane. Another was deported and gave a San Francisco paper its first look inside. What the cell held, what the count sounded like 13 times in 24 hours, and what the band rehearsed in the barber shop. 300 civilians lived on that island, including the guards' children. The children took a boat to school in San Francisco every morning and came home to the Rock at night. A man came off the launch in chains, walked up the hill, and was stripped, searched, showered, and numbered before he saw the inside of the cell house. He was not, in most cases, one of the most dangerous criminals in America. That was the reputation, and the reputation was useful to the government, but the actual selection rule was different. Alcatraz took men from Leavenworth and Atlanta and McNeil Island who had escaped from somewhere or refused to obey anyone or become too famous to keep in an ordinary penitentiary. Notoriety was a qualification, so was being a nuisance. The first group had come in August 1934. 137 men from Leavenworth moved across the country in barred rail cars that were loaded onto a barge and floated to the island still locked. By 1935, the population sat at roughly 260. There were 336 cells. Alcatraz was never full, and it was never meant to be. The point of the place was the ratio. A new arrival was issued a number, a blue shirt, blue and white trousers, a belt, and a pair of shoes. He was told how to wear them, sleeves down, top button open. He was held apart for his first 30 days, with no yard privileges, and then walked to the cell he would be counted in. He could reach both of its walls without moving his feet. 5 feet wide, 9 feet deep, 7 feet high. A steel cot against one wall, a folding table and a folding seat, a wash basin with a single cold tap, and a toilet with no seat on it. One blanket. Nothing on the walls. No radio, no newspaper, no clock. The bars were tool-proof steel installed when the government took the island over, replacing the softer bars of the military prison that had stood there before. The cell house itself was concrete, 500 feet long, built in 1912 by military prisoners who had quarried and mixed most of it themselves. 2 blocks of cells faced each other across the main corridor. The men called that corridor Broadway. The cells on Broadway were the least desirable in the building because everyone walked past them and because they got the least light. Other corridors got street names too. Times Square was the section by the clock at the end of the cell house. A block was barely used. D block was at the far end, and at its end were 6 cells the men called the Hole. At night, the sounds were the doors, the foghorn, and the wind. On some nights, when it came from the right direction, men could hear the city. San Francisco was 1.25 miles away across the water, close enough that on New Year's Eve, the noise of it carried. And 13 times in every 24 hours, a bell rang, and every man in the building stood up at his bars, facing out in absolute silence, until a second bell said the count was correct. The whistle went at 6:30 in the morning. 20 minutes to make the bed, clean the cell, and be standing at the bars for the 6:50 count. Breakfast at 6:55, out of the cell promptly. Into single file, no changing places in the line by moving forward or backward. At 7:20, the work details formed and went out through the rear gate and were counted through it. They were counted again by the shop foreman when they reached the shop. There was a rest period in the middle of the morning and a count, lunch and a count. Details back out at 12:25, counted through the gate, counted into the shops. A rest period at 2:30 counted. Work stopped at 4:15 counted. Then the walk back up the hill, the evening meal, and the cells locked for the night in the late afternoon. 13 official counts every 24 hours. On top of those, the shop foreman took 6 more verification counts of their own. Shaving 3 times a week, showers twice. That was the day for a man with a job. A man without one went back to his cell after breakfast and stayed in it. Work at Alcatraz was not the punishment. Work was the thing a man earned by behaving, and it came with reductions in sentence attached, which meant a job was time and no job was time standing still. Meals were the exception to everything. In the mess hall, a man could take as much as he wanted, of anything on the line. He had 20 minutes to eat it, and he had to finish all of it. The menu set in 1934 was still running. Breakfast was oatmeal and milk, fried bologna sausage, cottage fried potatoes, toast, oleo, margarine, and coffee. Dinner was bean soup, roast beef, and gravy. Stringless beans, mashed potatoes, coffee. Supper was pork and beans, cornbread, potato salad, apricots, bread, and coffee. There was fresh bread and pastry. There was butter on the tables. There was pie, and there was ice cream. Federal regulations set a floor of 2,100 calories a day for a prisoner. Alcatraz served over 3,000. Waste was the offense. Anything left on the tray was reported, and a man who made a habit of it lost privileges. Taking more than he could finish was a disciplinary matter. At the end of the 20 minutes, each man laid his utensils out on the tray in a fixed arrangement. Knife on the left, fork in the center, spoon on the right. Then he sat with his hands at his sides while a guard walked every table and looked at every tray. The guards ate the same food out of the same kitchen in their own dining room next door. The mess hall was also one of the few places in the building where a man was allowed to open his mouth at all. There was no economy inside Alcatraz. No commissary, no money, no trade, no debts. Tobacco was issued free, so there was nothing to sell and nothing to buy, and the informal markets that run every other prison in the country did not exist on the island. What men had instead was reading. The library was heavily censored, with sex and crime forbidden as subjects, and the men read anyway. A man in general population went through 75 to 100 books in a year, not counting magazines. The yard was open on Saturday afternoons and Sunday mornings, up to 5 hours. Baseball, horseshoes, chess, dominoes. In the yard, men could talk as much as they liked, and in the shops, they could talk as well. Everywhere else, they could not. Not on the tiers, not in line, not cell to cell after lockup. So they used the plumbing. A man would bail the water out of his toilet bowl, put his head down to the empty drain, and speak into the pipe, and the man in the next cell would hear him. That is how the rule of silence was actually broken every night, in a building where speaking was a punishable offense. And there was a band. An orchestra formed among the prisoners and rehearsed in the barbershop during the week and during recreation periods. Men who could be sent to isolation for speaking on a tier were permitted to sit in a room together and play instruments. A released prisoner described the arrangement to a San Francisco paper and named Capone, who had turned into a competent cabinet maker and a passable banjo player. Talking in the wrong place had a price, and the price was fixed. There were 53 regulations. Regulation 5 stated that a prisoner was entitled to food, clothing, shelter, and medical attention, and that anything else he received was a privilege earned by conduct. Regulation 23 made a groundless complaint a disciplinary offense on its own. The instrument at Alcatraz was not a strap or a whip. It was D-block. A man sent there was locked in isolation, in some cells in complete darkness, for periods measured in weeks. He was allowed out to shower and exercise once a week, and the punishment followed him after he came back because a rule violation cost good time, and good time was sentence. That is the mechanism worth understanding. At Alcatraz, the discipline was not applied to the body, it was applied to the calendar. Speaking on a tier could cost a man years, and the years were subtracted quietly, in an office, by a man who never had to raise his voice. In the spring of 1935, one of them walked off the island and told the newspapers about it. His name was Verrill Rapp. He had come to Alcatraz on August 11, 1934, among the first civilian prisoners on the island, transferred from McNeil Island with 4 years to serve for assault on a police officer and breaking jail. He was not famous. He was not a gangster. He was a man with a short sentence in a prison built for men with long ones. In the spring of 1935, he became the earliest prisoner paroled from Alcatraz, and when he left to face other charges, he did something the Bureau had spent a year trying to prevent. He described the place. He called it inhumane treatment. He said it was sending men there insane. He was talking about an island where, at that same hour, roughly 60 families were sitting down to supper and putting children to bed. About 300 civilians lived on Alcatraz. Guards, foremen, clerks, the medical officer, and their wives and their children in furnished apartments on the south side of the island, a few hundred feet from the cell house. The old military parade ground had been turned into a playground. Children roller skated on it. They played on the abandoned cannon emplacements, and the thing their parents worried about was the cliffs. They went to school in San Francisco. Every morning they took the launch across, and every afternoon they came back on a boat that made 9 round trips a day in those years and took 12 minutes each way. There was a recreation hall, there was a social club, there were dances and card games, and neighbors who all knew each other because there were only 60 of them, and no way for anyone else to arrive unannounced. Families said they felt safer on the island than they had felt in the city. There was no traffic, no crime, and nobody unknown. They slept in rooms with windows on the bay. They came and went on a schedule they could read in advance. And they ate exactly what the prisoners ate, from the same kitchen, cooked by the same inmate cooks. That last detail is the answer to the thing that does not add up. What Alcatraz took was never the food. The food was better than most working Americans ate in 1935, and it was better on purpose, because a warden with 30 years in prisons believed that hunger caused riots and that a well-fed man was easier to hold. What it took was speech, news, movement, and time. And all 4 of those were visible from the cell house in the afternoon, going past the windows on their way to the boat. One thing on that island applied to everyone on it: the count. 13 times a day it proved that nobody had left, and the proving of it was the entire purpose of the place. Nothing arrived except by one launch on a fixed schedule, and everything that arrived was inspected and logged, including the groceries and the children's school books. When an escape alarm sounded, the siren was for the whole island. The families locked their doors and stayed inside until it stopped. Alcatraz was not a prison with a village attached. It was one closed system, with 2 populations inside it counted by the same bell. The silence rule did not survive the men who left. Rapp talked in the spring of 1935. Later that year, the government began deporting alien convicts, and one of them, released from the island for that purpose, gave the San Francisco Chronicle its first real account from inside. The headline was about the silence. A released counterfeiter followed with an interview, naming prisoners and describing the orchestra. Then the men still inside stopped working. There were strikes in 1936 and again in 1937. The rule was abandoned in 1937. It had lasted 3 years, and it failed partly because ex-prisoners kept describing it in newspapers, and partly because it could never be enforced against men with drain pipes. Nothing else changed. Not the counts, not the cells, not the boat. The warden stayed until 1948, and in January 1935, a storm dropped part of the island, and the industries building where the men worked slid to within 2.5 feet of the cliff edge. The request went in for $6,500 to extend the seawall. What was built by the end of the year was a cheaper pile of rock. Morning on the island started before the light did. A man stood at the bars of a cell he could touch both sides of, facing out, waiting. Below him, the launch was tied up at the dock. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, a child was being got ready for a boat to school. The whistle went at 6:30, 20 minutes to make the bed and fold the table down. Then the cold tap, the 20 minutes at the tray, the spoon laid on the right side, and the bell.